What happens when a black executive is falsely accused by a stranger? At the airport she helped build policies for. Why did the officer ignore evidence and double down? And how did one quiet moment at a coffee kiosk turn into a national scandal? If you're ready for the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe to H2 Black Thread. 500 a.m. JFK International Airport was already alive with the unmistakable chaos of a city that never truly sleeps. Intercoms blared over the hum of dragging suitcases. Flight updates echoed across terminals. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and overbrewed coffee, and everyone was in a hurry. Dana Blake stood quietly in line at a small coffee kiosk near Gate B-17. Her carry-on bag rested by her side, her laptop case slung across one shoulder. The line inched forward and Dana kept her focus ahead, her thoughts already racing through the day's agenda. Flight at 710, meeting at 1100, back-to-back calls after that. A long day, but nothing she couldn't handle. She was 2 people away from ordering when it happened. A man, white, mid-50s, rumpled polo shirt and khaki shorts, strode past her, wedging himself between her and the woman ahead. "I was next," he said flatly without looking at her. Dana blinked, caught off guard. Her eyes met his for a second. No apology, no hesitation. Just entitlement baked into every word. She could have said something, she had every right to. But she didn't. Instead, she took a breath and stepped back slightly, giving him space. It wasn't worth it, not here, not now. Some confrontations cost more than they are worth, especially for women like her. From several feet away, Officer Remer watched the exchange. His blue TSA uniform was pressed crisp, his gaze sharp, calculating. His eyes didn't leave Dana as she ordered her coffee, thanked the barista, and stepped away. 10 minutes later, latte in hand, Dana moved briskly toward her gate. She moved like someone who belonged, graceful, focused, efficient. But just as she neared the final checkpoint, Remer stepped into her path. "Ma'am," he said, holding up one gloved hand, "step over here, please. Random screening." Dana paused. Around her, other passengers passed through freely, some with large bags, some distracted, none stopped. She hesitated, then complied without a word. Behind her, the line moved forward. A few travelers glanced in her direction. Some looked away quickly. No one spoke. The humiliation wasn't loud, but it was public, and it was beginning. The cool air of the terminal brushed against Dana's cheekbones as she stood still, arms raised slightly, waiting for the TSA one to pass over her. Her posture remained composed, shoulders straight, feet planted. But inside, she was already recalibrating. Dana Blake, 42, didn't like to lose time. She was tall, poised, and moved with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Her brown skin glowed softly under the airport fluorescence. A navy blue tailored suit framed her lean figure, professional, clean, no nonsense. Her hair, coiled into a smooth bun, gave her profile an air of precision. She looked like what she was, a woman in charge. What most people didn't know, what Officer Remer hadn't bothered to ask, was that Dana had once walked these terminals pushing a beverage cart. 2 decades ago, she had started as a flight attendant with United Skies Airlines. She had served drinks with a smile, soothed crying infants mid-flight, and de-escalated conflict at 30,000 feet. Now, she was Executive Vice President of Organizational Strategy, heading to Seattle to lead a high-stakes discussion on corporate accountability and racial equity in aviation. It wasn't just another meeting. It was the kind of meeting that could define policy, shape training protocols, influence hiring and retention across the country. Dana had personally helped craft the DEI initiative, and today's session with the board would solidify its rollout. So yes, she had a plane to catch, a plan to deliver, a purpose to fulfill. But instead, she stood in stocking feet, enduring what she chose to believe was just an inconvenience, not an insult. She'd flown hundreds of times, more than most of the staff scanning IDs. She knew security procedures, knew delays, knew chaos. But what she didn't know, what she refused to believe, was that her presence, her skin, her success, might be the real reason she was being pulled aside. Dana kept her expression unreadable. Random screening, she told herself again quietly, but a quiet voice deep inside had already begun whispering otherwise. As the TSA agent waved her through, Dana stepped back into her heels and adjusted the strap of her laptop case. Her fingers brushed against the smooth leather, but her thoughts were far from the present. For a fleeting moment, the hum of the terminal melted away, and she was 10 years old again. It was this very airport. JFK. Same buzzing chaos. Same polished floors. But back then, she wasn't walking through with a tailored suit and a Delta diamond tag. She was perched on a bench by the maintenance wing, legs swinging off the edge, hugging a paper bag with a peanut butter sandwich her mom had packed for her. The lights overhead buzzed slightly. Her backpack was her pillow. It was the only place she could wait while her mother, Loretta Blake, finished her overnight janitorial shift. Dana used to watch travelers through the glass, wondering where they were headed. Paris, Miami, somewhere with palm trees or museums. She loved watching the pilots in their crisp hats, the flight attendants with their polished shoes, the passengers with laptops and briefcases. But what she remembered most, what never faded, was the time her mother was stopped. Loretta, dressed in her blue custodial uniform, badge clipped neatly, gloves in hand, was heading into a staff-only hallway when a security guard, white, buzz-cut, suspicious eyes, intercepted her. Asked to see her ID, searched her bag, patted her down in full view of everyone. Dana had watched from the bench, too stunned to move. No one else had been stopped, just her mother, just a black woman in a work uniform. That night, Loretta had laughed it off. "They're just doing their job, baby," she'd said. But Dana remembered how her mother's voice had trembled just a little, and how her eyes didn't quite meet hers. That was the night Dana made a silent vow: one day I'll walk through these gates and they'll know my name. Now, years later, her badge was gold embossed, her title executive, and yet here she was, being stopped, being watched, being doubted. Different uniform, same stare. Dana stepped up to the gate counter with practiced ease, boarding pass ready in hand. The young gate agent scanned it, nodded politely, and opened her mouth to welcome Dana on board, but she never got the words out. A voice, tight, sharp, and familiar, cut through the hum of the waiting area. "There she is, that's her." Dana turned slowly. It was him, the same man from the coffee kiosk. Wrinkled polo shirt, wild eyes, a bead of sweat shining at his temple. He was pointing. "She told me to watch my back," he said to someone just behind him. "She said I'd regret it." Officer Remer stepped forward like he'd been waiting for a cue. His posture was rigid, his tone curt. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside. Now." Dana blinked. "What?" The gate agent hesitated, scanning between them, her fingers still hovering near the scanner. "She threatened me," the man repeated louder, as though volume were proof. "She muttered it right after I got my coffee, said I should be careful." "That's a lie," Dana said, her voice level. Her chest tightened, but her tone held. "I didn't say a word to him. We were at the same coffee shop, yes, but I didn't engage." Remer didn't seem interested in her explanation. "I'd like to speak with the barista," Dana continued calmly, "or you can pull the footage. I have nothing to hide." Remer shook his head. "You're not boarding until we investigate this." Dana's lips parted, but she caught herself before the fury spilled out. Behind her, the boarding line slowed. Conversations hushed. Dozens of eyes turned toward the unfolding scene, some curious, some confused. none intervening. She felt the heat rise under her collar, but she didn't let it show, not here, not in front of him, not again. Instead, she took a small step back and squared her shoulders. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unwavering. "I've worked too hard to be taken down by a lie." Remer motioned toward the security corridor. Passengers stared as Dana, an executive in a Navy suit, poised and prepared, was quietly escorted away like a suspect. And in that moment, the injustice wasn't just visible. It was deafening. The fluorescent lights inside the security office buzzed faintly, casting a sterile sheen across the bland walls. Dana sat on a hard plastic chair, legs crossed, fingers intertwined tightly in her lap. She kept her breathing steady, even as the seconds dragged like hours. Across the room, Sergeant Henry entered with a file folder tucked under one arm. Older than Remer by a decade, he moved with a quiet authority. Less bark, more bite. He didn't sit. "We've reviewed the surveillance footage from the coffee kiosk," he said, his voice steady. "It clearly shows the man cutting in front of you. You did not confront him. In fact, you didn't speak to him at all." Dana blinked once. The tension in her chest loosened, but only slightly. "There's no audio, but your body language is neutral," Henry continued. The barista also confirmed no threatening words were exchanged. From the corner of the room, Officer Remer stood stiff, eyes on the floor. The shift in energy was subtle, but Dana felt it instantly. His confidence had withered. His arms were still folded, but now in defense, not control. Sergeant Henry turned to her. "I apologize for the delay and the disruption to your morning. You're free to go." Dana didn't rise right away. Instead, she calmly reached into the side pocket of her laptop case and pulled out a slim leather badge holder. With 2 fingers, she opened it and revealed the gold-embossed credentials inside. Executive Vice President, United Skies Airlines. She held it up, just for a second, just long enough. Then she looked directly at Officer Remer. "You may want to inform your supervisor who you just delayed." No raised voice, no theatrics, just fact. And suddenly, the room felt much smaller for him. The United Skies VIP lounge sat above the terminal's noise like a cloud, quiet, temperature-controlled, perfumed with freshly ground coffee and soft jazz humming low from hidden speakers. Dana didn't feel at ease here today. She sat near the back, in a leather armchair that should have felt luxurious, but somehow made her feel smaller than usual. Her carry-on rested beside her. Her latte had long since gone cold on the glass table. Across from her sat Monique Sanders, United Skies internal communications manager, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s, with a notebook always within reach and a softness she reserved for moments like this. Dana had called her from the security office, not for PR damage control, but for something far simpler, to not be alone in the aftermath. Now, Dana stared at the muted television overhead, the morning news showing scrolling stock tickers and weather updates. Her voice was low, each word weighed before it left her. "I did everything right," she said. "I said nothing. I smiled. I let him go ahead of me, and still I was the one pulled out of line, accused, doubted." Monique didn't interrupt. She just nodded, letting the words settle between them. "I wasn't even angry," Dana continued. "Not at first, just embarrassed, humiliated, and the worst part, it didn't surprise me." She let out a bitter laugh, one without amusement. Monique finally leaned forward, her voice soft but sure. "You don't need to shout to show strength. You lived it." Dana looked at her. Her eyes, though tired, still held something firm, something unbroken. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Robert Jeffries, CEO of United Skies Airlines. She picked it up. "Robert." His voice came through immediately, warm but urgent. "Dana, I just got the report." "Are you okay?" "I will be," she said. "But I missed the meeting." He didn't miss a beat. "We're rescheduling. What happened to you this morning is unacceptable. I've already made a few calls. The airport is investigating the officer and we're issuing a formal complaint." Dana exhaled, her voice steadier now. "Thank you. We stand with you," Robert said. "Take the time you need, but when you're ready, we'll make this right together." When the call ended, Monique reached over and squeezed Dana's hand. "You're not alone in this." And for the first time that day, Dana believed it. By midday, the incident had already begun to stir ripples far beyond the terminal. At United Sky's corporate headquarters, an internal memo was drafted and circulated among senior leadership. It detailed the events of the morning with precise language. Terms like unlawful delay, racial profiling, and executive misconduct by third-party personnel appeared in bold. The message was clear. This was not going to be swept under a jetway rug. Dana didn't ask for the inquiry. She didn't need to. The machine moved on its own. The company's legal team submitted a formal complaint to JFK Airport security, naming Officer Remer specifically and requesting an investigation into his actions. Within hours, Remer was placed on administrative leave pending review. Meanwhile, the man who'd fabricated the story, the coffee shop accuser, wasn't immune either. Airport officials flagged him for filing a false report, a serious offense in a post-9/11 aviation world. His name was added to a provisional no-fly list until legal counsel could assess the severity of his actions. Back in the terminals, whispers flew like unchecked baggage. "He stopped who? She's an EVP, right? A black exec. Damn, that's not gonna sit well." Some security officers exchanged wary glances. Others shook their heads knowingly. Officer Remer had always walked a fine line, authoritative, sometimes aggressive, but now it seemed he'd stepped too far. At JFK's administrative offices, meetings were held behind closed doors. Internal Affairs requested all surveillance footage from the terminal. Union reps prepared for a potential media storm. HR began pulling Remer's previous incident reports, searching for patterns. And through it all, Dana said nothing publicly. She didn't tweet. She didn't email statements. She didn't answer the press inquiries that began trickling in. But silence didn't mean stillness. Inside her company, inside the airport authority, and inside every officer who'd witnessed the moment but said nothing, movement had begun. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And the question echoing through every hallway was no longer, did this happen? It was, how many times has it happened before, and to whom? The next morning, Dana returned to JFK. Same gate, same terminal. But this time, no one stopped her. She moved through security with the smooth rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. But today, every step carried something new, not resentment, not fear, something steadier. Resolution. She wore the same navy blue suit, though the night had left subtle shadows beneath her eyes. Her hair was still pinned in that perfect bun. She didn't change who she was. She never needed to. At the boarding gate, the agent greeted her respectfully. No hesitation, no second glances, just a quick scan, a quiet nod. As she stepped onto the plane, a flight attendant, young, brown-skinned, with a flicker of knowing in her eyes, leaned in slightly and whispered, "We saw what happened. Thank you for staying strong." Dana paused, offered a faint smile, and continued down the aisle. She found her seat by the window, placed her bag in the overhead bin. Sat down. The hum of the engines outside was faint for now, but steady. Like the pressure in her chest, not heavy, just full. She didn't feel triumphant. There was no applause, no statement to make, just the quiet truth that she had endured something unfair and refused to shrink. As the final passengers boarded and the cabin settled into its early morning hush, Dana reached for her laptop. The screen flickered to life. She stared at the blinking cursor for a moment. Then she began typing. Subject: Policy draft officer sensitivity and anti-bias training. She didn't know what the final document would look like, but she knew how it would begin. Let's begin drafting that new officer training policy. Outside her window, the sun was just beginning to rise over the tarmac, and somewhere far behind her the terminal still buzzed. But Dana Blake was already in motion again, not just toward Seattle, toward something bigger. If you've ever been judged for how you look, not who you are, you're not alone. Maybe you've stayed silent. Maybe you've smiled through it like Dana. But silence doesn't mean acceptance, and dignity should never come with conditions. Share this story if you believe in justice. No matter how quiet, deserves to be exposed. Comment if you've ever felt dismissed, unseen, or underestimated. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, where real stories inspire real courage. Because sometimes, change doesn't start with a headline. It starts with someone refusing to shrink. Where we speak truth, hold the line, and honor the strength in every quiet stand. See you in the next story.